York, this is Democracy Now!
We need to have bold policies and can't have austerity politics, or we're going to be in a world of hurt.
As President Trump unexpectedly signs a $900 billion COVID relief package after calling the bipartisan bill a disgrace, Democrats are taking up his call to expand direct stimulus payments from $600 to $2,000. We'll speak to California Congressman Ro Khanna about the COVID bill and look at how, because of Trump's delay in signing, millions of unemployed workers lost benefits while Trump vacationed and golfed over the holiday weekend. We look at how dozens of immigrant women detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia have joined a class-action lawsuit against ICE over allegations they were subjected to non-consensual invasive gynecological procedures and surgeries, including sterilizations, that were later found to be unnecessary.
I don't think this is okay. The people that we trust, is the medical, the staff that is here. We can't trust them anymore. Don't keep us in detentions like this. Let us be with our family. Let us fight our case outside of the detention centers. We have kids. We have people that love us and, that they're waiting for us. This year is my daughter's first Christmas, first Thanksgiving. I missed it.
We'll speak to two survivors of the medical abuse and neglect at the Irwin County Detention Center, one still jailed and one deported. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump signed the $900 billion coronavirus relief measure and the government funding bill Sunday evening after threatening to derail the bipartisan package last week and narrowly averting a government shutdown. Millions, though, were plunged into uncertainty over the Christmas holiday as Trump held up the signing of the bill, allowing unemployment programs to lapse, which will lead to delays in benefits or loss of benefits for out-of-work Americans. The relief package includes direct payments of $600 per person, expanded unemployment benefits, and aid for small businesses. Trump released a statement upon signing the bill, reiterating his demand for $2,000 checks and said he was sending back a redlined version of the bill to cut wasteful items. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said there'll be a full House vote today on increasing direct payments after Republicans blocked the move to pass the proposal by unanimous consent Thursday. In his statement, Trump also said the Senate was to investigate voter fraud in the November election, though Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell did not mention this in his own statement about the legislation Trump signed. Trump has been calling for protests in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, despite the worsening pandemic, when Congress meets to validate the election. Trump's also calling on lawmakers to review Section 230, a provision in the National Defense Authorization Act, which offers liability protection to social media companies. Trump vetoed that bill last week. Lawmakers are expected to vote on overriding his veto this week. This all comes as COVID-19 continues to ravage the United States, with cases now topping 19.1 million and over 333,000 deaths. 1 in every 1,000 Americans has now died from the coronavirus. December, the deadliest month in the United States since the start of the pandemic, as experts warn things will likely get worse and post-holiday season travel will lead to new spikes. California became the first state to top 2 million COVID cases last week, as hospitals in Southern California are reporting just a handful to no intensive care unit beds available. In Indiana, the death of a black doctor from COVID-19 is shining stark new light on racism in medical care. Dr. Susan Moore posted a now viral video on Facebook earlier this month describing racist treatment by medical staff who did not respond to her pleas for care despite being in intense pain and being a doctor herself.
You have to show proof that you have something wrong with you.
in order for you to get the medicine. I put forward and I maintain, if I was white, I wouldn't have to go through that. This is how black people get killed. When you send them home and they don't know how to fight for themselves.
Dr. Moore died last Sunday, just over 2 weeks after she posted the video. In New York, officials are investigating ParCare Community Health Network, a healthcare provider which may have fraudulently obtained doses of the COVID-19 vaccine and administered it to non-prioritized groups. As coronavirus vaccination efforts continue across the country, federal officials and the head of the White House's Operation Warp Speed acknowledge the goal of vaccinating 20 million people by year's end will not be possible. Nearly 2 million people in the U.S. have gotten their first dose of the vaccine. In international news, the European Union has begun a coordinated rollout of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine after it was approved last week. In Latin America, which has been suffering a devastating second wave of the virus, Mexico, Chile, and Costa Rica have begun their mass vaccination programs. Canada, Japan, and South Korea are some of the latest countries to detect cases of the highly infectious new COVID variant, which was originally identified in Britain. Japan announced it's temporarily banning non-resident foreigners from entering Japan. Meanwhile, officials in Nigeria say they're investigating a new variant of coronavirus days after South African officials blamed a surge in COVID-19 cases on another variant, which they claim is more contagious. South Africa just passed 1 million cases, and health workers say they're quickly becoming overwhelmed.
Yeah, we're dealing with the COVID, nothing else now. We no longer any sickness that we know it's COVID all the time. You know that you are at the risk with the patient all the time.
In China, citizen journalist Zhang Zhan was given a 4-year jail sentence for her social media reporting from Wuhan as the virus took hold at the start of the year. Last week, the first COVID cases were recorded in Antarctica at a Chilean research base. Britain and the European Union have reached a Brexit trade agreement after months of contentious negotiations and with just days left before the current transition period ends on December 31st. The key points of the deal include no tariffs and no quotas on traded goods, the end of free movement for UK citizens within the European Union, and no hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Both sides expressed relief after the deal was reached. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen told reporters, quote, "Europe is now moving on." In Ethiopia, the death toll from a mass shooting attack in the west of the country last Wednesday has surpassed 220 people, according to humanitarian workers. The Ethiopian military killed dozens of suspects the day after the attack. The region has been plagued by increasing ethnic violence, which has caused tens of thousands to flee amid recent fighting. This comes as Ethiopia's military is still locked in a battle with Tigray forces in the north of the country in a conflict which has displaced hundreds of thousands of people. In Bosnia, refugee rights groups are warning of a humanitarian crisis after a massive fire tore through an encampment for hundreds of asylum seekers, forcing them to shelter in tents despite the winter cold. The camp near Bosnia's border with Croatia is home to nearly 1,000 people hoping to cross into Western Europe to seek asylum. Aid groups say many of the refugees are already suffering from frostbite and hypothermia. This is Sajid Ali, a refugee from Afghanistan.
There isn't any heater inside the tents. It's really dangerous to live here because it snowed yesterday, and the tent might fall down because you can see that all the snow has gathered on the top of the tent, so that might fall down. And there are more than 500 immigrants are living inside the tent. If they died, so who will be responsible?
At At least 20 asylum seekers from countries in sub-Saharan Africa drowned after their boat capsized off Tunisia's coast Thursday. Over 620 migrants have died while crossing the Mediterranean Sea this year, according to the International Organization for Migration. Over 3,000 migratory deaths were recorded around the world throughout 2020, though the actual number is expected to be far higher. In Niger, election officials are counting ballots after Sunday's presidential and parliamentary elections, which could lead to Niger's first-ever transfer of power between two democratically elected governments. Former Interior Minister Mohamed Bazoumi hopes to avoid a runoff by winning an outright majority against 29 other candidates. In the Central African Republic, 3 United Nations peacekeepers were killed in 2 separate attacks Sunday, just as presidential and parliamentary elections got underway. The attacks came hours after a coalition of Nigerian rebels called off a ceasefire with the government demanding a halt to voting. In the capital, Bangui, hundreds of women marched ahead of Sunday's election, calling for an end to political violence in the Central African Republic.
Women are tired of war. We don't want war anymore. So this march is to support the UN's peacekeeping force so it can fulfill its mandate, which is to protect the population, because we no longer want war. We are tired.
One of Afghanistan's top election monitors has been assassinated. On Wednesday, gunmen opened fire on Yusuf Rashid as he was driving to his office at the Free and Fair Election Forum of Afghanistan in the capital, Kabul. The U.S. State Department condemned Rashid's killing as a barbaric and senseless assassination. His death comes ahead of another round of peace talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government are scheduled to be held in Qatar next month. In Saudi Arabia, authorities have just sentenced prominent women's rights activist Loujain al-Hathloul to 5 years and 8 months in prison on charges of agitating for change, pursuing a foreign agenda, and using the Internet to harm public order. Al-Hathloul was arrested in 2018 after leading a movement to lift Saudi Arabia's ban on female drivers and overhaul its male guardianship system. Her family says she's been held in solitary confinement and was subjected to abuse, including electric shock, flogging, and threats of sexual violence. Al-Hathloul's sister says authorities may suspend part of her sentence, making her eligible for release in 2 months. She's also banned from traveling for 5 years. The Trump administration's formally notified Congress that it intends to authorize the sale of nearly $500 million worth of laser-guided bombs to Saudi Arabia. Critics say the weapons could be used on civilians in Yemen. In 2019, President Trump vetoed bipartisan legislation that would have blocked arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. President Trump has pardoned more former members of his inner circle. Just ahead of Christmas, Trump pardoned his disgraced former campaign chair, Paul Manafort. Last year, a federal judge ruled Manafort violated terms of a plea agreement by intentionally lying to special counsel Robert Mueller's office after he was convicted on charges of bank fraud and tax evasion. Trump also pardoned his longtime friend and advisor Roger Stone, who was convicted on 7 criminal counts, including lying to Congress and witness tampering. And Trump pardoned Charles Kushner, the father of Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner. Charles Kushner was convicted in 2005 on charges of tax fraud, illegal campaign contributions, and witness tampering. So far, 60 of Trump's 65 pardons have gone to people he personally knows or who aided him politically. In Tennessee, authorities say a 63-year-old white man whose body was found at the scene of a Christmas morning explosion in downtown Nashville was responsible for the blast. Anthony Quinn Warner was a self-employed computer worker. Before the blast, an RV with a recorded message warned area residents to evacuate. If you can hear this message, evacuate now, a woman's voice repeats from the RV. Authorities say Warner's DNA was found among the wreckage. No motive has been identified and no other fatalities were reported. 3 people were injured. The blast damaged dozens of structures and caused at least one building to collapse. The bomb went off outside an AT&T transmission building, disrupting services, including some 911 calls. In Columbus, Ohio, protesters are calling for justice over the police killing last week of Andre Hill, a 47-year-old black man. Hill was fatally shot by an officer just seconds into their encounter. Body cam footage shows Hill was walking toward Officer Adam Coy with a cell phone in his hand before Coy shoots him. Columbus Director of Public Safety is deciding today whether to heed the recommendation of the city's mayor and police chief to terminate Officer Coy. This is Alvin Williamson, the brother of Andre Hill, speaking at a community vigil Saturday.
You used my brother as a target practice. You didn't even give him a chance to peacefully present himself, to even ask a question of what was going on. You didn't even give him a chance of life as far as that minute that you opened fire in a reckless nature.
In Illinois, 3 people were killed and 3 others wounded Saturday after an active-duty Special Forces soldier opened fire at a bowling alley in the city of Rockford. 37-year-old U.S. Army Sergeant Duke Webb was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. Police believe Webb had no ties to the victims. They're describing the shootings as a completely random act. Nearly 42,000 people across the U.S. have been killed in gun violence in 2020, a record death toll. And a judge has delayed the execution of Lisa Montgomery, the only woman on federal death row. Montgomery suffers from mental illness caused by a life of abuse, and her lawyers are asking for clemency. She was convicted for the gruesome 2004 murder of a pregnant woman. Her execution this month was delayed after her lawyers got COVID-19. A D.C. district judge ruled Thursday the Justice Department cannot move ahead with a January 12th execution because the stay order will still be in place. Advocates hope Montgomery's life will be spared by Joe Biden, who's vowed to abolish the federal death penalty. To see the story of Lisa Montgomery, you can go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. When we come back, we'll look at how President Trump unexpectedly signed a $900 billion COVID relief package after calling it a disgrace. We'll get response from Congressman Ro Khanna, one of the Democrats who are taking up his call to expand direct stimulus payments from $600 to $2,000, but Khanna called for it before Trump did. And we'll go to Georgia to talk with a woman inside the Irwin Detention Center and a woman who's been deported to Jamaica. Both underwent non-consensual surgery by a doctor they were sent to by the immigration jail. Stay with us.
Picture a mistletoe, 8 candles in the window, while songs sing It's Cold Outside on a jingling radio. You spent months imagining the Christmas tree to take home, the gifts you give your children, the warm meals they would have loved. Imagine this love for the rest of the year.
When our hopeful voices cry, we shall not fear.
Think about a holiday we call home. Think about a holiday we call home. Think about a holiday
With our breath.
A Holiday Called Home by a Skid Row choir as part of the Urban Voices Project. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump unexpectedly signed a $2.3 trillion spending package Sunday that includes a $900 billion COVID-19 relief package. The bill includes direct payments of $600 for most adults, expanded unemployment benefits, aid for small businesses, money for vaccine distribution, and a temporary extension of a federal eviction ban. Millions were plunged into uncertainty over the holidays as Trump held up the signing of the bill while he vacationed and golfed in Florida. This allowed 2 unemployment programs to lapse Saturday night. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar tweeted Sunday night, "Never forget, his tantrums have real-life consequences for millions of Americans. Since unemployment insurance expired Saturday, this delay will almost certainly postpone state unemployment payouts. I'm so glad his days of inflicting pain are coming to an end," she tweeted. Last week, Trump blasted the bipartisan bill, describing it as a disgrace, even though his own administration had helped negotiate the bill. Trump's demanding lawmakers amend the bill to give $2,000 in direct payments to most Americans, a proposal opposed by most Republicans but endorsed by Democrats. The Democratic-controlled House will vote on increasing payments to $2,000 today. Trump has also asked lawmakers to rescind parts of the bill, but the request is expected to be ignored. The COVID relief package is part of a broader spending package that needed to be signed in order to avert a government shutdown. The broader bill includes a number of provisions endorsed by Republicans, including new tax breaks and nearly a $1.4 billion for Trump's border wall. In other congressional news, the House is scheduled to vote today to override Trump's veto of a $740 billion defense bill. We're joined now by Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California. Last night, he tweeted, "I'm glad we're finally having a vote tomorrow on a $2,000 stimulus. The question remains why we didn't have this vote in March when Tim Ryan and I proposed this. This is a lesson. It should not require permission from Trump or Republicans to vote on and push for bold policies." Congressman Khanna, welcome back to Democracy Now! That seems to me to be a clear message to the Democrats. Can you just explain what's happened over this holiday weekend? Trump didn't play ball with Congress at the beginning, but was certainly out there playing ball, playing golf through the weekend as unemployment lapsed, and then out of the blue, without getting any concessions, he signed last night.
Well, that's a fair summary. I mean, he was just playing politics here. He had no intention of actually pushing for $2,000. He never tried to get McConnell and the Republican senators on board. And Mnuchin, as you pointed out, never was advocating for that in the negotiation. So there's no doubt in my mind that Trump is to blame for the delay, for the anxiety people had, and McConnell and the Republicans are to blame for not having $2,000. That said, what I am saying is that Tim Ryan and I, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, many of us have been calling for $2,000 since March, April of this year. And we should not wait to have Republican support or Republican statements before voting on that. We need to make sure that when we're advocating for working families, when we're advocating for progressive policy, that we put that forward, have votes on that, and put pressure on the Republicans to do the right thing.
So explain how this will work. Before he signed this bill last night, again, 24 hours earlier, unemployment wouldn't have lapsed for many people. Now millions, perhaps 12 million people are plunged into uncertainty. They might get it late. They might not get it for a week. And we'll lose that forever. But before he did that, Nancy Pelosi called for a voting on the amendment to get it to 2,000 today. Now, without changes, Trump has approved the legislation. What could possibly get this passed, not only in the House, but do you believe in the Senate?
I think it's an uphill battle to get it passed in the Senate. I mean, we're going to vote tonight to have $2,000 checks, but McConnell has already indicated he's opposed to that. Cornyn has indicated that he's opposed to that. So what it would take is either Trump not just tweeting out, but convincing Republican senators to support it, or next administration, hopefully Joe Biden, making this a critical component of what we're going to push for. But the obstacle has always been in the Senate.
There was word that John Ossoff in Georgia was demanding that David Perdue pull his ad saying that he had been part of passing this legislation because then Trump didn't sign off on it. Trump is expected to go to Georgia to campaign for the runoff elections next week. That could have put pressure. Kevin McCarthy in the House, your colleague there, reportedly had a conversation with Trump yesterday. Who knows what caused this change? But what Trump said in signing this to save face, because he got no changes but signed off on this bill, he said it's because Congress had agreed to look into voter fraud, the tremendous amount of voter fraud he alleges that took place that he has never proven, even when cases were brought to one after another Trump-appointed judges, not to mention the Supreme Court. What about this? And what about this legacy that Trump, this issue that Trump keeps pushing right through January 6th when he's calling for thousands to come to Washington, D.C. to challenge the final approval of the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
I mean, your analysis is absolutely correct. This had nothing to do with helping the American people. This was not a debate about whether we get $2,000 checks to working families. This was Trump upset with McConnell because McConnell is not willing to have senators challenge the results of the election, and McConnell has already congratulated Joe Biden. So Trump says, well, look, I can blow up this deal, and I can actually cost you those Georgia races if I blow up this deal, because that's going to hurt Perdue and Loeffler in their races. And I think behind the scenes, you had McConnell and McCarthy telling Trump, don't do this. You're going to cost us those seats. And who knows what concessions they made? Who knows what Mitch McConnell has promised him on January 6th? It's of real concern. And all we can hope and be vigilant about is that there is a transition and that you don't have shenanigans with the Senate or the House of Representatives on January 6th.
So at the same time, you have this vote expected to take place. You said tonight that Nancy Pelosi is putting forward to increase the payments to $2,000. If you can quickly say why the Democrats didn't demand this from the beginning, why it took Trump. It seemed that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Pelosi, Schumer were his major enemies. But then he put Mitch McConnell at the top of the list because he dared to say the words President-elect Joe Biden. So ticked him off that he just put in this demand at the end after Mnuchin negotiated the whole thing. But why didn't the Democrats, your colleagues, insist on this from the beginning?
I don't know. It's a good question. That's what I've been asking on Twitter and making the point more broadly. I mean, there were many of us, not just progressives, people who are highly respected in the party, Senator Kamala Harris, Tim Ryan, many saying, let's get $2,000 in the pocket of ordinary Americans. Let's vote on it. We should have been saying this, voting on it, campaigning on this loudly and clearly since March, partly because it may have been effective in actually getting Americans relief. And secondarily, it would have made it clear that one party is for getting money to working families and putting money in the pockets of people, and the other party is blocking it. Instead, I think we were too reluctant. We were not sufficiently bold. We finally did pass a HEROES Act, but that had $1,200 checks. It did not have $2,000 checks. None of the checks were monthly. So what I think this shows is that our policies are popular. You see Donald Trump realizing that too late. We should be willing to have votes on it, to advocate for it, and realize that we're on the side of people. We don't have to wait for some kind of mythical bipartisan consensus to advocate for good policy.
And, of course, $1.5 billion for the southern border wall between U.S. and Mexico that Trump had insisted Mexico would pay for, reportedly pushing scores of these projects forward because he thinks possibly President Joe Biden will stop this wall. But what about that? That's part of this bill. That's part of what the Democrats and Republicans arrived at, and by consensus.
Well, that's wrong, and that's why some of us in the Progressive Party voted against the authorization for the Homeland Security and against the authorization for defense. We voted for the part of the bill that would get $600 checks to people and that would fund most of the other government. And the Speaker split the bill because she knew that there were many progressives who could not in good conscience vote for more funding for the border wall, could not vote for this bloated defense budget. And that is something that we're going to have to try to reverse in the first year of the Biden administration.
So let's go to a tweet you sent out earlier this month. You wrote, if you vote for a bloated $740 billion defense budget, which is over 50% of our discretionary budget, or the Trump $1.6 trillion tax cut, please save us the lectures about deficits. You have no credibility. In addition to voting on the $2,000 checks to go out, both houses of Congress are expected to overturn Trump's veto of the NDAA. Can you explain what this is all about?
It's very simple. Trump has vetoed the defense bill, which would be $740 billion. Now, his reasons for vetoing it are disingenuous. He wants to strip tech companies of Section 230 protections, which, if you strip them of that, would really hurt speech on the internet. This is not some thoughtful reform. But the bottom line is $740 billion is way too much defense spending. We're spending money on aircrafts. We're spending money on the modernization of nuclear weapons. And we can't find money to get food into people who need it. We can't find money to get more rental assistance for folks who are going to face evictions. We can't find money to get $2,000 into the pockets of Americans. The priorities are wrong. And so I'm not going to vote to override his veto. There's almost a crisis in Washington where everyone's flying back in because they don't want something to happen where we don't pass the defense budget at this bloated level. But my view is let's really ask why we are spending so much money on defense when we have such other needs of national security. One other point, Amy, the NIH actually has the ability to have universal viral detectors, to have antiviral treatments. Why aren't we funding those programs, instead of buying more aircraft carriers?
Speaking of this military bill that you say you will break from the Democrats in voting to override, the Trump administration has formally notified Congress it intends to authorize the sale of nearly $500 million worth of laser-guided bombs to Saudi Arabia. Critics say the weapons could be used on civilians in Yemen. In 2019, Trump vetoed bipartisan legislation that would have blocked arms sales to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Congressmember Ro Khanna, you have continually championed the issue of peace in Yemen and the stopping of the U.S.-backed Saudi-UAE war on the people of Yemen. Can you comment on what that means, what you're going to do about it, and the fact you recently told the Washington Post Biden should immediately reverse course if this deal goes through?
President-elect Biden must reverse course, and I'm convinced he will. I think Tony Blinken, his Secretary of State designee, understands the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and wants to make sure that we bring it to an end. The first thing we need to do is stop supplying the Saudis, not just with weapons, but also with any logistical support, intelligence support that they can use to increase their offensive in Yemen. And we need to support Martin Griffiths at the UN, who's been doing a terrific job in bringing the parties together. So this is a last-ditch effort from Trump to reward the Saudis. He's had a pro-Saudi policy for 4 years. It's unfortunately led to one of the greatest humanitarian crises in the world. But that is going to end January 20th. I have confidence, actually, in Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. They understand the depths of this crisis, and they will work with Congress to help bring it to an end.
Let me ask you about COVID. You represent California in Congress. COVID is raging across the country, with cases now topping 19 million, over 1/3 deaths. 1 in every 1,000 Americans has now died of COVID-19. December, the deadliest month in the U.S. since the start of the pandemic. As experts warn, things will likely get worse with post-holiday season travel, leading to new spikes. Your state, California, becoming the first state to top 2 million cases last week, as hospitals in Southern California are reporting just a handful to no ICU beds available. Congressman Ro Khanna, can you talk about what is happening now and what needs to happen?
Well, it's tragic. It's unprecedented, unfathomable. I mean, we're losing over 3,000 Americans a day. I would say there are 4 things that need to happen. First, new leadership needs to set a new tone about the importance of wearing masks and social distancing. It's not just legislation. Leadership matters. I think President Biden will do that. Second, we need an efficient and fair distribution system of the vaccines. That remains our best bet. Third, we need to continue to invest in testing and contact tracing. That still isn't happening in many parts of the country. And finally, we need massive investment in making sure people have health care. There are people, who are paying $200 for tests. In fact, I had my family tested. It costs $200 for each test. Now you can get it reimbursed by insurance, and some insurance does, some doesn't. We need to make sure that the testing and the health care related to COVID is free so that we can actually incentivize people to do that.
How do you think the issue of Medicare for all will play when you have COVID that has really exposed the racial, economic disparities when it comes to health care, particularly that, who has access, who doesn't? This goes to issues from vaccine access to test access to mask access. How you, a proponent of Medicare for all, can lead a new Congress and a Democratic administration, which, frankly, President Biden has said he will veto Medicare for all. Do you think you could change that, given what so many people in this country have understood?
I do. Medicare for all now has become a moral imperative. Here is the thing. I mean, this country's history, when we have had past crises, we usually respond with bold legislation. When there was the Depression, we responded with bold legislation on the economy. When we had civil rights movement and Dr. King, we responded with civil rights legislation. We've now just had the greatest healthcare crisis, arguably, in the last 100 years. It has exposed that people who don't have healthcare are having worse outcomes, are facing either death or facing higher risk of illness. It should be obvious that the solution is to have people have health care coverage from the day they are born. That is what Medicare for all is. We need to have a vote in the House of Representatives on Medicare for all. We need to continue to advocate for it, and we have to build consensus for it. Now, people say, well, the votes aren't there, the Senate votes aren't there. If Franklin Roosevelt or Lyndon Johnson had thought that way, they would have never gotten anything done. LBJ could have just said, well, the Southern votes aren't there, let's never pass civil rights. That is not imaginative leadership. The challenge is for us to build a consensus and the votes. And if we're not going to do it in this crisis, then when?
Ro Khanna, we want to thank you for being with us. Democratic Congressmember from California. He represents Silicon Valley, a member of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Next up, we look at how dozens of immigrant women detained by ICE at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia have joined a class action lawsuit against ICE over allegations they were either forcibly sterilized or subjected to non-consensual invasive gynecological procedures. We'll go inside Irwin to speak with a woman who alleges this, and to Jamaica, the country of Jamaica, where another woman was deported after her surgery. Stay with us.
Para decidir si sigo poniendo esta sangre en tierra, este corazón que bate su parche, sol y tiniebla, para continuar caminando al sol por estos desiertos, para recalcar que estoy viva en medio de tantos muertos, para decidir, para continuar, para recalcar y considerar, solo me hace falta que estés aquí, con tus ojos claros ahí. Fogata de amor y guía, razón de vivir mi vida. Ay, ay. Fogata de amor y guía.
Razón de vivir. Reason for Living by Vagos Herrera and Chano Dominguez. This is Democracy Now!, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A warning to our listeners and viewers, this next segment includes graphic descriptions of alleged assaults. As we turn to an update now on how dozens of immigrant women detained by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, at the Irwin County Detention Center have joined a class action lawsuit against ICE over allegations they were subjected to non-consensual and invasive gynecological procedures and surgeries that were later found to be unnecessary, and in some cases left them unable to have children. The complaint was filed last week in the U.S. District Court for the Middle District of Georgia and cites sworn testimony from at least 35 women about their treatment by Mahendra Amin, a physician in Ocilla, Georgia. The lawsuit also describes how the women suffered retaliation for speaking out and faced threats of deportation. One of the survivors, who's still detained at Irwin, joined a call with reporters on Tuesday. This is Elizabeth, who's 21 years old, originally from Guadalajara, Mexico, but has lived in the United States since she was 8 years old, first detained in June after calling 911 to report being physically abused by her boyfriend. Her daughter was 4 months old at the time. She's now 10 months old and living with Elizabeth's mother in Florida, as Elizabeth now marks 5 months in detention. In this clip, she describes part of her experience with Dr. Amin.
This doctor, he comes in and he doesn't even acknowledge me. He just comes in and he sits right in front of me. My escort was right behind him. He starts prepping for the procedure that's gonna be done without telling me anything. He's not explaining what's gonna be done or anything. Then he just says, "Open up your legs." And, his demeanor is very intimidating, very just standoffish. So, as soon as he says that, I just feel like I have no control over my body anymore. I didn't know what was going to be done to me.
In a minute, Elizabeth will join us by phone from the Irwin jail to talk more about her ordeal and what she's calling for. And we'll hear from another woman who says Dr. Amin pressured her to get a hysterectomy. When she refused, she found he removed her fallopian tubes. She's since been deported. Also with us, Azadeh Shashahani, legal and advocacy director at Project South, co-counsel for women at Irwin who say they were subjected to these non-consensual and invasive procedures by Dr. Amin. In September, her organization joined the Government Accountability Project and others to file a complaint about the alleged abuse based primarily on nurse Dawn Wooten's testimony. Wooten is a nurse who worked in the jail operated by the LaSalle Corrections Corporation, who spoke out about the high number of undocumented women undergoing hysterectomies, a surgery to remove the uterus without proper consent. We welcome you back to Democracy Now! We thank you so much for being with us. Let's begin with Azadeh Shashahani. Can you lay out this broadened lawsuit? We've been following this very closely, but explain who's included in this, what the allegations are, and what has happened to Irwin, the detention center, as well as Dr. Amin.
Thank you very much for having me, Amy. First, I should say that I'm glad that the complaint that we filed in September, along with the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, Georgia Detention Watch, and the South Georgia Immigrant Support Network, and the testimony of our courageous client, Ms. Dawn Wooten, the whistleblowing nurse, has paved the way for more women survivors of medical abuse at Irvin to come forward and tell the world about what they suffered at this facility. So this recent lawsuit that Project South filed along with our partners, the National Immigration Project of the National Lawyers Guild, Immigrants' Rights Clinic at Columbia Law, David Dreyer, and several other law school clinics, is a class action lawsuit filed on behalf of women detained at Irving who have been subjected to invasive and non-consensual gynecological procedures, that is medical abuse. So in total, we had more than 40 women who filed sworn testimony in court, despite consistent attempts by ICE to silence them. And the filing also includes evidence showing that ICE and the private contractors at the facility knew as far back as 2018 about the medical abuse being inflicted on women, and yet they didn't do anything. Instead, they kept sending women to this same doctor who was not even board certified. And the lawsuit also focuses on the issue of retaliation. So since we filed the complaint in September, instead of cooperating with the investigation, ICE has been actively trying to cover their own tracks and erase the evidence through deporting survivors of medical abuse, survivors and witnesses to medical abuse. So they have already deported 6, and they were trying to deport several more before lawyers and Congress stepped in to try to stop the deportations. And using other tactics of retaliations against those who speak out, such as threats of placing women in solitary, or actually placing them in solitary confinement. And so the status is that Irving is still up and running, despite our demands for several years now to go ahead and shut this place down. And they're not sending women to Dr. Amin anymore at this moment.
So we're going to go right now to Elizabeth, a survivor of alleged medical abuse, speaking to us from inside Irwin. She has a limited amount of time she can speak because she's calling from inside a jail. Elizabeth, please tell us your story, how you ended up at Irwin, and then how you ended up being having a medical procedure done on you. It sounds like this call has just disconnected, and we're going to try to get this call back on, be able to speak with Elizabeth, a survivor of alleged medical abuse from inside the Irwin Detention Center. It is very difficult for these women to get their stories out, but they increasingly are. We're going to go right now to Wendy Dow, who's testified that while she was detained at Irwin, Dr. Amin told her she had large cysts and pushed her to get a hysterectomy, which she refused, but he still performed a surgery that left her unable to have children. Doctors later told her the procedure was completely unnecessary. She's originally from Jamaica, lived in the U.S. for more than 20 years, has 4 U.S.-born children. She was deported in May. Wendy, if you can tell us what happened to you.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Thank you so much.
September of 2018, I went to court for a traffic violation. And after that, they put, I got arrested. They put an ICE hold on me. So I ended up in Irving County. I was there for a year and 6 months with stomach pain. I went in there with hypertension, and I had stomach pain, and I have a hernia. So I made a claim to the medical department, and they didn't do anything until one day. They came for me, didn't know where I was going. They woke me up 5 o'clock, and when I went there, it was Dr. Admin. He performed X-ray and a sonogram on me and told me that I got multiple cysts in me. So I asked him what that meant. He didn't answer. So after the point, he told me that I got a mass in my ovary. I'm like, what is that? He says, it's a mass that grows in your ovary. You don't know if it's cancerous, but it's a mass. I went back to the facility. I spoke to the nurses about that. They said they don't know because Dr. Admin didn't send them any type of paperwork as yet. So I think it's a couple weeks after that,
They woke me up again 5 o'clock that morning. I went to Dr. Almin again. That told me that I got a size of the cantaloupe in my ovary. That is cancerous. By then, I was like shaky and crying, and I asked him, what caused this, and he said he can't tell me because he was hired through ICE, and he got to send the paperwork back to the facility. So when I went back to the facility, I spoke to the nurses, sent multiple papers to them, multiple papers. They never answer until I think this is a cause of the stress that I couldn't see out of my eyes. My blood pressure was all the way up, and my vision was lost. And next morning again, they came, another morning, 5 o'clock, told me I'm going to the doctor. I thought it was for what I was going through. When I went to the doctor, they told me I had surgery. But basically what I'm going through, I was like out of my mind and wasn't, concentrating on what they were saying because I had headache, couldn't see out of my eyes or anything.
So the doctor cut your fallopian tubes?
Yeah, when I woke up, I noticed that I couldn't wake up at all because I was on anesthesia. When I went back to the facility, I didn't know as yet. I noticed there were 3 holes in my stomach. So I was asking them, what is this? They say I got surgery, but they don't know what type of surgery I had. After request the medical paper, they brought it back to me. That's when I know that my fallopian tubes was out.
And then how much later were you deported to Jamaica, where we're speaking to now in Kingston?
After that, I think it was a couple months after that.
And your kids still in the United States? They are U.S. citizens?
They were in the United States with a friend. I had a 11-year-old that she's disabled. I had a 14-year-old at the time. She's turned 14 now, but she was 12. And I had a 15-year-old. So they were with a friend at the time.
I wanted to go, Wendy, back to the facility, the jail. You're speaking to us from deportation, and you're demanding you be allowed to come back to this country where you lived for 20 years. A number of women have had their deportation stopped. But we're back with Elizabeth inside the facility, and we don't want to leave her inside the jail. Elizabeth, if you can describe what happened to you.
Yes. I arrived at Irwin County Detention Center in July of 2020. A little after I arrived, I started feeling abdominal pain, so I asked to see a doctor. I went, like she said, multiple times until they finally made an appointment. When I went to this appointment, I went to see Dr. Amin. When I was there, I was shackled from my ankles, my wrists, and my stomach. I had a chain around my stomach. The nurses took my weight, my temperature, and my blood pressure with my ankle shackles.
Your shackles. You are in for a civil offense. They're saying you violated your immigration status. You had called the police yourself because you said you were being abused by your partner. And they arrested you.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So now you're shackled and you're brought to this gynecologist.
Yes, ma'am. As they took my weight and all this, they put me back in a room where the nurse told me to take off my clothes, so they had to take off my chains in order for me to take off my clothes. Then I'm just sitting down on the bed. Dr. Amin comes in. He doesn't even acknowledge me. He doesn't say anything. His demeanor is very much, manly and rude. So it's like he's unapproachable. Like, I didn't even say hi to him. He sits in front of me. He starts putting his gloves on and getting ready for the procedure that is going to be done, which he does not tell me what is going to be done. Then the officer that is with me, she's like right in front of me in the eyesight where she was going to see my body parts. So I told the nurse if she could please move. So the person that was there, she said she couldn't leave the room, but she just moved from there. Then Dr. Amin, his exact words were, "Open up your legs." He just told me, "Open up your legs." So at that moment, I just felt like I had no control over my body. He just made me feel, like worthless, because I'm like, oh, wow. So I did what he told me to. Then he just said, it's going to be cold. And he stuck the tube inside of me, like just hard. And he was doing a vaginal ultrasound. As I'm about to turn to the monitor, he takes the tube out, and he tells me that I have a cyst on my left ovary, that I'm going to get a depot shot for it to dissolve. If it doesn't dissolve in 4 weeks, I'm going to be scheduled for surgery. At that time, I didn't know what a depot shot was. I didn't know it was birth control. My family have had birth control before, and I've been scared of birth control because they make their hormones crazy. They gain a lot of weight, and they just, they get acne in their face and stuff like that. So if I would have known that it was birth control, I would have gotten it. But he just said, you're getting a depot shot. Like, he didn't give me no choice.
You're talking about the drug Depo-Provera injected into your arm.
Yes. Yes, ma'am. He just leaves the room after that, and I get dressed, and then they shackle me up once again. Then the nurse comes in, and she gives me the depot shot in my arm with my handcuffs on, and then she makes me sign the paper, which I didn't know what a paper was because I couldn't even hold the paper because I had handcuffs in my arm. So the way I could, I just grabbed a pen and I signed the paper. And on my way back to the detention center, I'm talking to this girl that was also transported in there with me. And she tells me that she also has a cyst in her left ovary, and she got the shot to not have babies. Those were her words, and that's how I knew that the depot shot was the birth control. And I started asking her questions. I was like, how was the doctor? Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me, Elizabeth, what you're calling for now? Sadly, you are in this ICE jail through Christmas. Your daughter is now, 10 months old, and you haven't seen her since she was 4 months. Is that right?
Correct. Yes, that's right. I have not seen her in 6 months.
And you're in a jail where you are exposed to COVID. What are your calls for?
I'm in a jail, yes, correct.
What are you calling for?
What I want out of this is for this jail to be closed. I want everyone to be freed in here. It is not fair for us to be in here when we have our kids, our family members out there. I want immigration, if it's possible, to be shut down. I don't want any more women to go through what I went through.
I mean, this is just an astounding story. How many women are telling your story? Wendy, you're deported as Elizabeth is inside the jail. You were held there until you were sent back, having been sterilized by the same doctor. Wendy Dow, what are you calling for?
I'm calling for the shutdown of Erin County. I'm calling for changes. People with minor offense, people that's been in the country for decades, people that don't know, your country, even though you're born there, you don't know the country. People don't go through the same thing like we went through, because I got 4 U.S. citizen children, and my children went through hell. I'm in Jamaica now. They can't get the doctor help they need. Financially, I can't support them. When my daughter got Medicaid in America, she got Medicaid because she's a disabled child. They can't get the education they needed here because they're not from here. I already got American citizens that die in Jamaica because of the health care, and I don't want the same thing to happen to my children.
I want to go finally back to Azadeh Shashahani, and we only have 30 seconds, but do you see it being feasible, since Congress members have taken up this issue as well, to shut down this ICE facility, this ICE jail, where women are being sterilized against their will, having medical procedures they don't realize? What can be done at this point?
At this point, we're looking to the Biden administration, and the demand is to go ahead and immediately shut this place down. And we're asking Congress to put pressure on ICE to shut down Irving, to hold ICE and the private prison contractors, including the prison corporation LaSalle, accountable for women who suffered abuse, and for the witnesses to be able to come back and testify about what happened. And we need a broader investigation.
We want to leave it there, but we'll continue to investigate. Azadeh Shashahani of Project South, Wendy Dow in Jamaica, Elizabeth, survivor inside Irwin now. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.